The morning I opened that box, I sat at my kitchen table for so long my coffee went cold. Inside was a black and white maid's uniform, a little apron, a little cap, and a card in my daughter-in-law's handwriting that said, "Hope you're a good sport." I had wired that woman $120,000 4 months earlier. I had given up Christmas for her. I had watched my son drift away from me one ignored phone call at a time, and she sent me a uniform. I put that card down. I finished my cold coffee, and I started planning. My name is Patricia Ann Whitfield. I am 62 years old. I live in Greenville, South Carolina, and I have spent the last 35 years of my life being the kind of woman who puts everyone else first. My son first, my family first, my dignity apparently last. But that October morning changed something in me that I don't think will ever go back to the way it was. And I've been asked to tell this story so many times since it happened, by friends, by my sister Linda, by people who heard it secondhand and couldn't believe it was real, that I finally decided to just sit down and tell it, all of it, from the very beginning. So get comfortable, because this story doesn't start at the wedding. It starts 3 years ago, the night my son came home and told me he was in love. My son's name is Ryan Thomas Whitfield. He is 34 years old. He is the kind of man who holds the door open for strangers, who calls me every Sunday morning without fail, who still tears up a little watching old baseball movies because his late father used to watch them with him. Ryan is, without any exaggeration, the best thing I have ever done with my life. His father, my husband Gerald, passed away 11 years ago from a heart attack. It was sudden. Ryan was 23, and the two of us, Ryan and I, we leaned on each other in a way that people who haven't lost someone suddenly like that might not fully understand. We became each other's anchor. I raised him mostly on my own after that. I worked as a real estate attorney here in Greenville. I built a decent life. I bought my own home. I put money away. I made sure Ryan never wanted for anything. Not love, not support, not resources. I was his mother and his father, and I did not take that lightly. So when he came to me 3 years ago and said, "Mom, I need you to meet someone," I wasn't nervous. I was excited. I had been waiting for this. I wanted my son to be happy. I wanted him to fall in love. I wanted to gain a daughter. What I got instead was Cassandra Nicole Beaumont. Now, I want to be careful here because I am not the kind of woman who dislikes someone on sight. I believe in giving people a chance. I believe in grace. And I tried. Lord knows I tried with Cassandra. She was beautiful, I'll give her that. Tall, polished, with sharp green eyes and the kind of confidence that fills a room before she even opens her mouth. She worked in marketing for a luxury fashion brand in Charlotte, and you could tell she was used to being the most impressive person in any room she walked into. The first time I met her was at a restaurant downtown, a nice Italian place Ryan had chosen specifically because he knew I loved it. I got there early, ordered a sparkling water, smoothed my dress. I was trying. Cassandra arrived 12 minutes late. No apology. She sat down, looked around the restaurant, and said, and I am quoting this directly, "Oh, this is cute." Not to me, not to Ryan, just into the air. Ryan laughed nervously and said, "Mom picked it." Cassandra smiled at me. "How sweet," she said. It was the way she said it that I noticed. Like sweet wasn't a compliment. Like sweet was a polite word for small, simple, beneath her. But I smiled back. I ordered the pasta. I asked her questions about her life, her work, her family. I was warm. I was gracious. and by the end of the dinner, I had a quiet feeling in the pit of my stomach that I pushed down the way mothers sometimes do when they love their children more than they trust their own instincts. I told myself, give her time, Patricia. People are nervous on first meetings. Give her time. I gave her time. Time did not help. Over the next year and a half, I watched Cassandra slowly, methodically, and I now believe deliberately begin to reshape my relationship with my son. It didn't happen all at once. It never does with people like Cassandra. It happened in small, almost imperceptible shifts, the way a tide moves. You don't notice it until you're already underwater. It started with the Sunday calls. Ryan had called me every Sunday morning for 11 years, 10 o'clock without fail. We talked for 30, 40 minutes sometimes, about work, about whatever he was reading, about memories of his dad. Those calls were sacred to me. About 4 months after he started dating Cassandra, the calls started getting shorter. Then they started getting later, 11 o'clock, then noon. Then one Sunday, he didn't call at all, and when I reached out, he texted back, "Sorry, Mom, Cassie and I are at brunch with her parents. Talk soon." I told myself that was fine. That was normal. He had a girlfriend. Of course things would shift. But then came Christmas. We had always spent Christmas at my house. Always. It was tradition. I cooked for 2 days, honey-glazed ham, sweet potato casserole, green beans with bacon, 3 kinds of pie, Ryan's favorites, every year without fail. That Christmas, the first Christmas with Cassandra, Ryan called me the week before and said very carefully that Cassandra's family was hosting and that it was important to her that they spend the holiday with the Beaumonts this year. "What about next year?" I asked. A pause. "We'll figure it out, Mom." I ate Christmas dinner alone that year. I told my sister Linda it was fine. I cried a little into my eggnog when she wasn't looking. Then there was the matter of the house. I had always told Ryan that when the time came, when he was ready to settle down, I would help him. Gerald had left us a life insurance policy, and I had set aside a portion of it specifically for Ryan, $120,000. I told Ryan about it when he turned 30. I said, "This is yours when you need it, for a house, for your future, for whatever comes." When Ryan and Cassandra got engaged, which, by the way, I found out about via a social media post, not a phone call, but I digress, they began looking at homes in the Charlotte area. Ryan mentioned the fund. He asked if the offer still stood. Of course it did. He was my son. What I didn't know then, what I only found out much later, was that Cassandra had already been spending that money in her mind long before Ryan ever asked me for it. She had already decided what house they were getting, what upgrades they were adding, what furniture they were buying. She had a spreadsheet. I'm serious, a spreadsheet with line items. Ryan mentioned this to me, sort of sheepishly, in a way that made it clear Cassandra had not told him how to tell me, just that he needed to. I transferred the money because he was my son, and I loved him, and I genuinely believed, that Cassandra would eventually soften. That once she felt secure, once she saw that I wasn't a threat to her relationship with Ryan, she would let me in. I was wrong. Ryan proposed to Cassandra in April, a rooftop in Charlotte, 15 of her closest friends there for the surprise. It was photographed professionally and on her Instagram within the hour. I got a text that evening. Ryan and I talked the next morning. He sounded happy, genuinely, overwhelmingly happy, and I focused on that. I focused on the joy in my son's voice, and I let everything else go quiet. The wedding planning began almost immediately, and it became clear very quickly that I was not going to be a part of it. Cassandra had a vision. That was fine. It was her wedding, and I respected that. But every time I gently offered a suggestion or asked if I could help with something or mentioned a vendor I knew through my years in Greenville's professional community, Cassandra would smile that smile of hers and say some version of, "We've got it covered, Patricia. Don't worry yourself." Don't worry yourself. Like I was a child asking to help bake cookies and being told to go play. I know this number because Ryan told me, and because later, much later, it became very important. At no point during the planning was I consulted about the guest list beyond how many people from your side, Patricia, to which I said 15 and was told I could have 10. 10 at my only child's wedding. But I swallowed it because Ryan was happy, because I kept telling myself, this is her wedding. Be gracious, Patricia. Be the bigger person. Oh, I would be the bigger person, all right, just not in the way I expected. 3 weeks before the wedding, Ryan called me. It was a Tuesday evening, and something in his voice was different, lighter, like he was trying to deliver something he was nervous about but had convinced himself was fine. He told me that Cassandra had a surprise for me. A surprise? Yeah, Mom, she wants to do something fun, something to make you feel included. She said she knows the planning process has been kind of excluding, and she wants to fix that. I felt something warm move through me. Hope, maybe, or at least the ghost of it. Ryan told me that Cassandra wanted me to have a special role in the wedding, not just as mother of the groom, but something more active, more participatory. She wants you to be part of the experience, he said. What does that mean, Ryan? Another pause. That pause I had come to dread. She's going to send you something in the mail. Just keep an open mind, okay, Mom? It's just her sense of humor. She means well. Keep an open mind. The package arrived 4 days later. A white box with a silver ribbon, like something from a boutique. I opened it at my kitchen table on a Saturday morning with a cup of coffee in my hand. Inside the box was a black and white maid's uniform, a complete set, dress, apron, little white cap, and a card. The card was printed on Cassandra's custom stationery. She had custom stationery, yes, and written in her neat, precise handwriting. Patricia, I thought it would be so fun and whimsical if you played the role of the head hostess at the reception, passing hors d'oeuvres, welcoming guests. Kind of like a fun social experiment. The guests will love it, and it'll make for amazing photos. Ryan thinks it's hilarious. Hope you're a good sport. Cassie. I sat at that table for a long time. I read that card 3 times. I am a 62-year-old real estate attorney. I have argued cases, I have negotiated million-dollar contracts, I have buried a husband and raised a son alone and built a life with my own 2 hands. And this woman who I had welcomed with grace and patience and $120,000, was asking me to wear a maid's uniform at my son's wedding as a social experiment? I picked up the phone to call Ryan. I put it back down. I picked it up again. And then I made a decision that I have not regretted for a single second since. I put the phone down, I picked up the maid's uniform, and I put it back in the box. But I didn't throw it away, because I had a feeling I was going to need it. The second call was to Harold Simmons, the branch manager of First Carolina Bank, the institution where a very particular account was held. Harold and I had known each other for 15 years. He owed me a professional favor. I explained what I needed. He was also quiet for a moment. "Patricia," he said slowly, "this is unusual." "I know," I said. "Are you sure you want to do it this way?" "Harold, I have never been more sure of anything in my life." He agreed to be at Magnolia Grove by 6 o'clock that evening. Cocktail hour would be ending, dinner would be beginning, toasts would follow. I thanked him, hung up the phone, and packed the maid's uniform in my bag. I arrived at Magnolia Grove at 2 o'clock in the afternoon. The ceremony wasn't until 4, but family was expected early for photographs. Cassandra's mother, Diane Beaumont, met me in the foyer. She was a tall, glacial woman from Greenwich, Connecticut, who wore her wealth the way some people wear armor, as both decoration and warning. She greeted me with a kiss on each cheek that never quite landed and said, "Patricia, so glad you could be here," in the tone of someone who was not particularly glad. Then she looked at my bag. "Did you bring it?" she asked. And there it was, so she knew, of course she knew. This was not just Cassandra's idea. This had Diane Beaumont's fingerprints all over it. This was a statement, a message, a performance designed to establish in front of 200 people exactly where I stood in this new family hierarchy, below them. "Of course I did," I said pleasantly. Diane smiled her thin smile and said, "Wonderful. There's a room in the back where you can change. The event coordinator will brief you on the hors d'oeuvre service." I walked to that back room. I changed into the uniform. I looked at myself in the mirror. And I thought, okay, Cassandra, you want a performance? I'll give you a performance. The ceremony was at 4 o'clock in Magnolia Grove's garden pavilion under arches of white roses and soft autumn light. I watched my son get married while wearing a maid's uniform. I want you to let that sit for a moment because I need you to understand what that felt like. Ryan looked beautiful. He was glowing. He couldn't stop smiling. And when Cassandra came down the aisle in her $40,000 gown, he put his hand over his heart like he couldn't believe his luck. He looked over at me once during the vows, just for a second. His eyes flickered to the uniform. Something moved across his face, too fast for me to name it. He looked away. I stood quietly. I held my silver tray. I smiled at the guests who looked at me with confusion, with pity, with poorly disguised amusement. A few of Cassandra's friends whispered to each other and giggled. One of them actually took a photo of me. I smiled at all of them because I knew something they didn't. 6 o'clock was coming. The reception moved inside to the grand ballroom after the ceremony. Cassandra had it decorated magnificently, I'll say that. The chandeliers threw warm light across white linens and towering floral centerpieces. The string quartet played Clair de Lune as guests took their seats. I circulated the room with my tray of hors d'oeuvres, smoked salmon on blinis, mini crab cakes, little bruschetta toasts. I offered them to guests with a steady hand and a calm face. Several of my own guests, the 10 I had been allotted, looked at me with open horror. My best friend Carolyn tried to pull me aside near the bar. "Patricia, what on earth?" "It's fine, Carolyn," I said quietly. "Just stay near me at dinner. I need you in the room." She searched my face. Whatever she saw there made her nod slowly. I continued circulating. I watched Cassandra on the other side of the room. She was laughing, beautiful, radiant in the way of someone who believes they have won. Every so often she would glance at me with that private smile, the one that said, "Look at you. Look at where you are. Do you understand now?" I smiled back. Every single time. At 5:45, as guests were finding their seats for dinner, I slipped out to the foyer.
Harold Simmons was already there, in a dark suit, briefcase in hand, looking like exactly what he was, a man who managed serious money and wanted to be done with this particular errand before 7. Margaret Chen was beside him, her eyes calm and focused. "You ready?" she asked me. "Almost," I said.
I went back to the room where I had changed. I took off the maid's uniform. I put it in my bag. I put on what I had worn when I arrived, a deep burgundy dress, pearl earrings, my mother's watch, low heels. I looked in the mirror one more time. Gerald used to say I looked unstoppable when I wore that dress. I hope you're watching, honey, I thought. I walked back into the ballroom. The dinner service was winding down. Champagne had been poured for the toasts. Cassandra's maid of honor, a woman named Brittany with very good hair and very little self-awareness, had just finished a speech that was 40% inside jokes and 60% crying. Then the MC, a pleasant young man named Devin, who had no idea what was about to happen, said, "And now, if there is anyone else who'd like to say a few words." My hand went up. I was already standing before anyone registered it was me. There was a ripple through the room, people turning, guests murmuring. Cassandra, seated at the head table, froze. She saw me. The uniform was gone, the burgundy dress was on, and something in my posture, something that had been quietly, carefully suppressed for 3 years, was no longer suppressed. Her smile didn't die yet, not quite. It just flickered. Devin handed me the microphone. I looked out at 200 people. I took a breath. And then I said it. "I hope you all kept the receipt for this wedding." The room went absolutely, completely silent. I let that silence breathe for 3 full seconds. Then I continued, "I have been standing in this room all afternoon, and some of you may have noticed that earlier I was dressed a little differently." A few uncomfortable laughs. My daughter-in-law thought it would be, and I'm quoting here, "fun and whimsical for me to wear a maid's uniform at my only child's wedding, as a joke, as a social experiment." More silence, denser now, heavier. I looked at Cassandra. "I want to say, Cassandra, that you are a beautiful bride, and I have tried very sincerely and very patiently to be the mother-in-law you deserved. I welcomed you, I made room for you, I changed my Christmases for you, and 14 months ago I wired $120,000 from my late husband's life insurance policy into your joint account, money that was set aside for my son's future because he asked me to, and because I loved him enough to trust that it was in good hands." I paused. "That money was used, in part, to fund this wedding. $210,000 worth of reception, of flowers and champagne and this beautiful venue, of that dress you're wearing." Cassandra's face had gone from frozen to white. "Now," I turned slightly toward the ballroom entrance, "a few of you may be wondering about the gentleman who just walked in." Every head in that room turned. Harold Simmons stood in the doorway of the ballroom in his dark suit, briefcase in his hand, looking entirely, immovably calm. That is Harold Simmons. He is the branch manager of First Carolina Bank, and he is here tonight because 3 days ago I exercised a legal right that had anyone bothered to read the financial agreement I sent along with that wire transfer, they would have known I had. I reached into the small clutch I had been carrying and removed a single folded document. 14 months ago, when I transferred that money, my attorney, who is also in this room, ensured that the transfer agreement included a clause, a standard protective clause used in large family financial gifts.
It stated that in the event of behavior constituting emotional harm, public humiliation, or deliberate exclusion of the donor by the recipient or their spouse prior to a mutually agreed upon milestone, in this case the wedding date, I retained the right to initiate a formal financial review and restructuring of the gift. I let that land. The maid's uniform was the milestone. The silence in that room was unlike anything I have ever experienced. The toast that was supposed to come after mine, from Cassandra's father, Richard Beaumont, never happened. The MC looked to the head table for guidance, received none, and gently suggested the dancing portion of the evening could begin. No one danced. What happened instead was a series of small, controlled explosions around the room. Diane Beaumont marched toward Harold Simmons with the velocity of a woman accustomed to making problems disappear through sheer force of presence. Margaret intercepted her with the particular calm authority of someone who has been in depositions with more frightening people. Cassandra's bridesmaids formed a kind of cluster around her at the head table. She hadn't moved from her seat. She was talking in low, rapid tones with one of them, Brittany, I think, and the expression on her face had settled into something hard and calculating. Ryan came to me. He sat down in the empty chair beside me, and for a long moment he just looked at the table. Then he looked at me. "Mom," he said, "why didn't you just call me?" And I said, gently, "I did, baby. You didn't hear me." He looked down again. His jaw was working. "I didn't know it was this bad," he said quietly. "I didn't know about the uniform. I mean, she told me, but she said you thought it was funny. Did you believe her?" A long pause. "I wanted to," he said. And there it was. Not malice, not indifference, just a man who had been slowly, steadily turned away from the truth by someone he loved, and who had let it happen because love can make us blind to what we don't want to see. I took his hand. "I know," I said. "That's why I needed to do this, not to punish you, not to punish her, but so that we both know from now on that I am not invisible, that I matter, that what was done to me today was not acceptable, and that I will not pretend otherwise." I don't know what she said to Ryan that night. I don't know what they said to each other in the hotel room where they were supposed to be beginning their honeymoon. I imagined it was not the evening either of them had imagined. In the months that followed October 14th, a great many things shifted. The financial review that Harold's presence had set into motion was, in practical terms, more symbolic than catastrophic. The money had already been spent. On the house, on the wedding, on renovations. There was no mechanism to claw it back. That had never really been the point. The point was the document, the clause, the fact that I had planned ahead, protected myself, and made sure that what was done to me was witnessed and recorded. What the review did produce was a very tense series of conversations between Margaret, myself, Ryan, and eventually Cassandra's own attorney, a process that forced everyone involved to sit in the same room and speak plainly about what had happened and why. Those conversations were not easy. Cassandra, to her credit, did not retreat into denial entirely. She was defensive at first, angry, but there were moments in those meetings, I saw them, where something real flickered behind her eyes, something that wasn't performance. She and Ryan went to counseling. Ryan told me this himself 3 weeks after the wedding on a Sunday morning phone call that came in at 10 o'clock sharp, the first 10 o'clock call in over 2 years. He sounded exhausted and honest and very, very much like my son. "I owe you an apology, Mom," he said. "I owe you a conversation," I told him. "The apology can come inside it." We talked for almost 2 hours.
He told me things he'd been afraid to say about the pressure he'd felt from Cassandra's family, about how small choices had accumulated over time until he barely recognized
And
the
I thought,
distance that had
not without a small measure of satisfaction, that on October the 14th, in the grand ballroom of Magnolia Grove Estate, in my burgundy dress and my pearl earrings, with Harold Simmons in the doorway and my son's hand squeezing mine, I had been, for the first time in a very long time, exactly the kind of woman Gerald always knew I was. Unstoppable. My name is Patricia Ann Whitfield. I am 62 years old. I live in Greenville, South Carolina, and I am nobody's maid.